Hello, fellow alchemists. Welcome back to our series on how to parse XML with Elixir. So I wanted to, of course, just recap what we've done so far. We have used the Suite XML library, and we've also used the Sexy parser, and then we actually benchmarked the difference between the two. Now, again, the reason I started this whole thing was because I recently had to go through and parse some XML file and actually create some templates in Elixir. And I actually went through all this process before and benchmarked and tried to figure out the best way to do all this. And what I ended up doing was there's two files I had to parse through. One is that I used the Sexy parser, and for that reason was because it was faster, and it used considerably less memory than Suite XML. Now the sad part is that I love the syntax of Suite XML. I could just, if you take a look at this, you can just basically go from, give me a list of tags with person, then within there I want you to grab the name and grab the text of that. You can just, it's just very convenient syntax. And with these, string and integer modifiers, even better, right? And I thought that was just the most convenient. And actually, I even found a way to kind of go back and forth and out of these from this kind of parent object or parent element. Now, I loved that so much, but you cannot beat the speed of Sexy parser. But I mean, look at this; it's not very easy to follow if you take a look at the other one. At least that's what I think. It's a lot more pattern matching and things like that. I think it's a little bit less straightforward, right, for new people. This one's much easier to follow, but of course you already know the problem with that. Now, I did happen to find a solution which I do use. So like I said, I use Sexy parser for one file, and for another file to kind of emulate this, I actually ended up using a NIF. Now, I've always been interested in C code before, but I don't know about you guys, but at least I don't feel comfortable with my C. I know my programming. I'm not very great with trying to remember to free memory, things like that. And so, I managed to actually been taking a look around, and I took a look at the rustler package. And I've been taking a look at Rust, and I did have some videos before with Rust. And I took this as an opportunity to actually see if I can create a NIF. And what's cool about NIFs is that they're very, very fast. They're integrated within your installation. The bad part is that if you crash them, you could actually crash your whole program. You can crash your VM or whatever. As opposed to a port, which is like an outside program. We may do a video about ports later on. I haven't had the need to use them. But in any case, to get to the meat of this, right, is that I wanted to create a video to show you actually how you can do the parsing with a NIF using Rust. And I'm going to go from the very beginning with installation, writing the code, and actually kind of testing the output. So we're going to do basically the same thing we did over here, where we write off our code and we just write the test with it. Okay. So normally I start with a test, but since I'm just basically copying and pasting and so forth, I'm not going to do it that way. What I am going to do is show you guys how to set up your NIF and everything. So starting from the beginning, typical style, we need to pull on our rustler package. And so on the other side of my window, I have it opened up. I did use this version, and the reason I used this RC version was actually because it's using a little bit better syntax, and I've been following this, and I saw another guide that used this, and so this is the one I prefer to use. I haven't found any problems with it being a release candidate. It's pretty straightforward. This one works fine. Now, the next step after that is we need to actually start to set up our rustler part. So this should give us some new tasks. I can't remember what it's called. So first I have to do mix steps git, of course. Forgot about that. So now we got our rustler and our toml. So mix help. So now this should show up with the, I believe it's a rustler install or something like that. Sorry, it's been a while since I had to do this. You only have to do this once, basically. So let me go ahead and grab that. Sorry, mix rustler new. So you can just take a look at that task, see how it all works. Sorry, I spelled rustler wrong. Rustler new. Oh, that's interesting. Alright, so then we just run it directly. Rustler.new. It's interesting that that doesn't come up. So the name of the Elixir module. So we just need to create some kind of name for the module. So we can probably just call it native. So I believe the way this one works is we could just say XML parse .native. This is the name. Yeah, that's okay. We could just call it native, which is fine. And there we go. Oh, I'm just going to go ahead and erase all that actually. Yeah, I want to actually remove all that, so let's just remove that. It's just going to call it native anyway, so let's just forget about all that. Let's start that again. So the NIF module we registered to. So we'll call it, XML parse native. And for this one, yeah, we can call it that. That's fine. So now we have all this. I don't want to call it native. It looks a little bit confusing. So now the next step is there's a nice little README in here. So here's all of our code that our NIF is going to go into. So if I just expand this out, you can see this is what we need to do. Is we need to basically create this module because it's not going to create over here. And so native. So we go over here. Let's just make a native ex file. Add it to our repo. Okay, we can just copy this. Not a bad idea. Oop. Okay, then we just go over here. Not a big deal. Grab this. Next one, parse native. No big deal. Looks cool. Now the next step is we need to add a couple more things. So one is that we need to add it to our compilers. So there's a couple of default compilers. So we need to add a compiler section into here. Make sure we add rustler to here and add in our default mix.compilers. That'll help out. And we also need to add in a configuration for our NIF, our crate. So rustler crates. And we need to actually just configure all of that. And so what I usually do is we take the name of our crate. So that would be XML parse, this one I believe. Should be this, and we can add some settings. So we can say, okay, just like Elixir, we have different environments, and I believe it's basically the same. You got prod, you got dev, you got test within Rust itself. And so if we are going to be using the test environment, we can do the debug build, so it's a little bit quicker. Else we can do the release version, which is basically our prod in terms of environments within Rust. You know, there's test, debug, and release, I believe. So debug and release are going to be the big ones. So that's it for that. Of course, we need a comma at the end. So I think the best thing is we can start running our tests to see if things are working okay. So this over here, it's going to start grabbing everything for us. So you can see underneath the hood, it's going to start to grab some of the data, etc., that we need to use. So it's going to do the compiling everything. So you don't have to worry about doing two steps. This these two basically does everything for you. So this one's going to run all the compiler things, but this one has to rely on which crates you declare over here. So you can see you can have more than one crate, which is quite cool. Now the next step is finally we need to start actually writing on our NIF. What I need to do next is I need to actually start to write on my NIF. And so the big thing is to take a look over here. We're going to be using the latest version of the syntax of Rust. So that's 2018. We're making a dynamic lib. That's fine. This is our only dependency for right now. But now we need to add another dependency in. So what I've used in my other project and I'm going to use over here is basically libxml, which is a nice little wrapper around the C libxml. So 2.15 is the latest one, as you can see. If you're using IntelliJ, I highly promote that you take a look at these and just attach. So you get a little bit more integration over here. So that just helps to kind of integrate your project in here into this editor. So attach works fine. So now we have libxml in here. And also when you attach, I believe it's going to automatically start pulling in these projects if you don't already have them, these libraries. So here is our NIF, right? So as you can see over here, the syntax is very straightforward, right? So I don't know if you know this, but within Elixir, the way it works where in Elixir is that you basically to interact with Erlang, you have this Elixir dot at the beginning. So this is actually what Erlang sees and what is kind of extracted from you away when you're writing all that code. And of course, this is our actual module name. And all you do is you basically just you declare your function, you call it that it's a NIF, you just add it over here, and that's it. It's really, really straightforward. So the next thing to do is, well, I mean, we can test to make sure that this is kind of working okay. And so obviously, it's just going to take two numbers and add them together and return a value. So just for fun, we could just run a quick test for that to make sure that our NIF is interacting fine. In case you're also interested, it does get compiled into over here. So you see it comes out as a .so file on here. So if you're curious about where the NIF actually goes, and that'll get bundled okay. Again, this stuff gets bundled okay just fine when you make your release. I've already put this into production already in another project, so don't worry too much about that. Now to actually test this, is all we need to do is we can go to here. We could just say, okay, test NIF works just fine. And we could just say, so that one is next one, parse native add. So 1, 2 is going to be equal to 3. And so we can just run this test. And it's going to compile again because you're compiling the debug build, not a big deal. And that's also because we also add libxml. And you see it passed just fine. So our NIF is working just fine. Of course, this add test is not useful, right? So now we begin the fun stuff, right? So here's going to be the real crux of what we're working on over here. So what we need to do is we need to actually start to build up our project, right? And so what we want to do is, of course, we pass in a string of XML data, and out comes our structs, right? And so within Rustler, you can actually create your structs within your NIF. If you use the Rustler, should be NIF struct, then you can actually declare a struct within here, and then you can actually create that. So what I'm going to do is my struct, I can just copy that over here. So my structs are not people, it's person. And so we have this, so I can just grab all that. So for my struct, I'm going to do person, and I have to type this out, so The name will be a string. The age will be an integer, but as you can see, we don't just have integers, we have to declare the size, so I'll just use I64. We just copy the same style. Not a big deal. And now I have to actually start to declare that this is something in Elixir. So we usually just always derive debug, so that way you can console log out or print line out what this thing is. And then also our NIF struct. And then we have to say what the Elixir name is of the NIF struct. So it's the module is going to be, and this one we just give the Elixir name. So this one is this over here. There we go. For this one, of course, we can change the name. So this one will be, we just call this one set parse. And this one we can take the XML data, and that will be a string. And what we do want to return is actually going to be a NIF result. And so this one will be a NIF result. And then what we're going to be returning, of course, is a vector. So a vector is basically, we can translate that as basically a list. Of course, a vector is actually a continuous piece of memory. I don't know if you guys know that. But the way the rustler will translate this to is basically just a NIF, or sorry, just a list in Elixir. So this is a person. And the reason this is a NIF result is that this could actually error out somewhere in between. And you can see over here, this one can return an error. So what that one means is that this NIF result will either be, a vector of persons, or if some type of error happens in here, rustler will actually catch that error for you and just return a bad error back to your code. So far I haven't hit that before, but yeah, it'll actually catch that bad error and it won't crash your VM. So that's also a really nice part about rustler. So we have our XML data, which is going to be a string, and all this stuff happens underneath, and of course we pass it in parse. Finally, we go back to our native code, and let's make sure we change that. And this one should be XML data. Parse. Okay. And now we get to the fun part, is how to read in all this data. So the way this works, I'm not going to get too much into it because it's a little bit kind of complicated. But what we need to do is we need to create a parser. So within libxml, there is a parser. It's been a while since I worked on this thing. So on the other screen I have some existing code, so that's why I'm popping back and forth. Okay. So we have a parser. So what I want to do is actually create a parser. Some parser, and create a new parser, I believe. Sorry, make a default parser. So parsing XML, not HTML. And then we have our document that we're going to be parsing. And our parser will parse a string, not a file. And we have our XML data in here. And this may return an error, so then we can just use the question mark operator to make life simple. So this is part of that NIF result, is this question mark will either say, okay, if we don't get a document back, I want you to just throw that error up, just basically raise that exception or throw that error. It's not actually throwing an error, but just trying to explain it. And that will get returned over here. So just return the error if this ever fails. That's what this question mark operator is. I'll probably make a video about this question mark operator later. This is all about parsing the data. Okay, then we need to make a mutable context. And I'll show you why it has to be mutable in a second. In the context, we create, sorry, that's not this one. It's not standard text context. This one is not here. This context is from here. So our context is, we need a new, and you see it takes a reference to a document. And then we can just unwrap that. And then finally, we need to start to grab our person nodes. So this is where we start to use our, what do you call that? Use our XPath, right? And we already have our XPath over here, so we could just use that again. So we're going to evaluate some XPath. So we can just reuse what we have over here. People, parse. Sorry, it's been a little bit of a while. So not this one. This one over here. So we just need this. So give me all the persons, the people. Okay. So give me all the person. And also make sure we get the nodes as a vector. So now we're going to have a vector of these nodes. And now we can actually loop through those. So person node in person nodes. I believe we could just do this. No, it's been a while since I've done expecting the person. Ah, okay. That's fine. So this is just talking about the error. So this is fine actually. So what we can do is now we can start to create a return value, right? So we have our people. And it's going to be a vector of person. And for vectors, what we should do, person. And what you should do is when you create a vector, you can create it with the initial capacity. And we already know how many people there are, so we take our person nodes and we just get the length of that. That'll make it much easier, so we don't allocate memory, keep allocating memory if we have like a lot of these coming up, right? We already know how many people we have as it is. So we have a vector of how many person nodes that we found. And we loop through that over here. Now the next step is that, of course, now we can finally just return the people. And we just have to wrap this with an OK. And the way returns work in Rust is that you just don't give a semicolon at the end. You don't have to use the word return. So you see over here, it tells you there's a problem. So, all right. I hope you guys are still with me. So we create a parser for our XML. From the parser, we parse the XML data. We have our document. Then from there, we have to create a context, which will help us to basically go through our XML document. We grab all the persons and we just get them all as a vector. And then finally we will create a vector of people. And actually this needs to be mutable because we have to actually add people to our vector. And we set that with initial capacity to the size of how many nodes we have from this person call. And that's just to make sure we don't keep resizing our vector if we don't have to, right? So I think initially it's the size of 2, and once that gets filled up, it's going to double up to 4 and then 8, etc., right? So we don't want to keep reallocating memory. It should be much quicker if we just say, okay, give me the size of what I'm expecting. So that should be fine. Now the next step is that we need to actually start grabbing the data that we need. So in that case, we want to grab the name. Sorry. Before we do that, what we need to do is we need to actually change our context. So that's why we have the mutable context over here, is that we can take our context, we can change basically the initial root node of where our context is. And so of course in this case we want to start from this person node. We just need a reference to that, no big deal. And then from there, we need to actually grab the text. So the way this one works Actually, you know what I'm going to do? It is a little bit tricky to grab the text, and so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a function for that. So call it getText. And of course, this one's going to take a reference. So it's going to take a context, which will be a reference to the context. And of course, the XML path. Sorry, the X path. And this one, of course, will be a reference, a string slice. And for this one, we're just going to return back string. So the reason that we're going to use a string slice is because string slices are basically strings, but they have a definite, they're not mutable. They're also a little bit complicated to explain. So again, I'm not going to go over that in here. But what I need to do is I'm going to create an object. And over here I take my context. And I want to evaluate the X path I passed in. And then finally I'm going to unwrap this object over here. And then finally, object toString will come out. So I'm going to let my name equal to reference of the context, and my XPath, of course, will be. We can also copy that for the most part. Yeah, we can copy all that. So my XPath would be this. And of course we have age. This is going to be a number. So for this one, probably make a get number. Do the same thing. Context, XPath, which is a string slice. And of course we'll return I64. And then what we can do is we can use our getText over here. We can pass in our context and our XPath, and we'll give our age. And I believe there's a parse. So we can just build upon that. So what we do over here is that we just basically took the same code to get a string, and then when we get the string back, we just make sure we parse that string to an I64, and this unwrap just says, just give me the value, I know it's going to be there. So get text, sorry, get number, pass in a reference to our context, and then finally that will be, I believe, age text. Double check that one. Let me see. Sorry, I shouldn't be closing that. So that's this one over here. Grab that. And not this one, but this one over here. And it looks to be the same. There we go. Now all we need to do is, within our people, we want to insert. We can just push a person, name and age. So because this is, the same name as name and age, we don't have to do this style. We could do that, but as you can see over here, it just recommends that we just remove all that. And that would just work just fine. And so there we are. So this one looks like it should work. Only one way to find out, right? So now we can actually run a test on this. So what I'm going to do is, for my NIF parse, of course it's going to take a string. It'll return back a list of person. And NIF parse, that's a string, do, and then we'll just call into our parse. And so I'm going to call parse on that XML string, and hopefully this should work. I'm pretty confident. I feel it's quite simple, but we'll find out, right? So I can just copy this, and so just change this part to be people.nifparse, and of course we catch this. And here is our test to see if this thing works. And so let's go ahead, let's format the code. All right, here we go. Oh, we have compile error, no problem. So this one, the trait from, is not implemented for rustler error. Okay, so you see now we have some issues to deal with. Expect a rustler error because of this. Okay. No problem. So rustler error. Okay, no big deal. So what I can do, I'm trying to think of what, I've actually never used the question mark operator from NIF result, so that's why I'm running into this now. A quicker thing to do would just be to catch that, and then just actually what we can do is we can just unwrap it. So I'll just say I know it should be fine and just unwrap it. So unwrap will just cause a panic if it doesn't work. Not a big deal. So now let's check it out again. Okay, and it worked. There we go. So this one, we're going to use mute, not a big deal. So for this one, we can just say, I guess you can use unwrap. Okay, that seems to solve the problem. So there we go. It seems to work just fine. And so now we can run all of our tests. There we go. And you see 7 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, 2 milliseconds, right? Look at that. Even with our sexy parser, we're, wow, nearly 4 times as fast now. It's really just amazing. So I know this was a long video. I'm going to probably make another video where we actually do some benchmarking between these. But you can see over here, it's really not so scary to work with Rust and work with a NIF within here. So this is how you make, you can use Rustler nowadays. So I apologize for a long video. I wanted to show you guys how to add Rustler to your project, how to create a NIF with Rustler, how to test it, how to write the code, everything like that. This is how I did it. I had this in production. This is not, something I made up on the spot. This is just based on previous project, and this is something that I do use. And I hope to use a little bit more of this in the future. So this is Alan from Plangora. Please subscribe if you haven't. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks. Hi. Please feel free to ask us any questions about Elixir, Flutter, or anything else in programming. Here's our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll answer your questions every Friday. Ya mantai ge dak man all. Yo wenti ji da wen wo.